All right. So today we are chatting with Mr. Sean Ruggeri. So Sean is an Emmy Award-winning cinematographer specializing in underwater documentaries. So Sean has extensive experience diving cameras and underwater housings. He's also rocked a few submarines, ROVs. But the way that I met Sean was that he actually joined Red Digital Cinema back in 2007, just before the launch of the Red One. He was working with Red through those years and specialized in both helping camera departments as the cameras were rolled out into the field, but then also, due to his love of underwater, spent an awful lot of time taking those cameras below the depths and then helping with the development of that underwater capability. The other thing that I probably didn't realize until I was researching Sean was his lengthy IMDB background that, gave me a big smile because he worked on, Spider-Man, Gone Girl, Thor, Mindhunter, Game of Thrones, which, is all very cool. But then obviously his latest adventures have even seen him out on Ocean X when they did their maiden voyage to the Red Sea. And then the other thing that we absolutely have to cover today is, the stuff he does with NASA. So, Sean, you absolute legend, mate, thank you for taking the time to be with me today.
It's my pleasure, Scott. I appreciate you having me on. I'm glad to join you.
Mate, so excited to have you here because, again, you're the sort of man that, doesn't mention all these cool things that you do. You're as humble as a man can be. But, buddy, look, I've heard this story, but for people not listening, mate, take me on a journey. You obviously, love of the water as a young man. Talk to me about that time. Like, what was it that called you to the ocean?
Oh, it's always been calling. Yeah, since I can remember, since I was a little kid, my plan was to be a marine biologist. So everything ocean I could get my hands on, any book, any nature special that was on TV or a film I could go watch, whether it's Jacques Cousteau or some of the more local legends and things like that. I just gobbled it up. Way before diving, I was out snorkeling in our local waters constantly. Try to get out there, weekly, if not every couple days, surfing as much as I could. Just total fish. Salty dog while I was still a puppy, Yeah, I got to say the marine biology thing, I love all the marine biologists I've worked with, and I have so much respect for the dedication it takes them to get to that place and then also to continue that work. I knew pretty early on I was not disciplined enough, both school-wise and just personality-wise, to stay in that game to become a marine biologist. So, a few departures. Yeah, I study as much as I possibly can because it's personal enrichment, and then it leads perfectly into the work I do too.
Of course,
I want to know my environment when I'm in it, and on top of that, the more you know about what you're filming, let's say underwater, sometimes you could predict behaviors. Sometimes you can know where you are in a certain environment and know what you might find way before you're even starting to look for it. Things like that. But yeah, so didn't become a marine biologist apparently. But
yeah, well, look, marine biology is the obvious one. I always thought that the idea of being a dolphin trainer would have been pretty cool.
Oh, that was huge to me too. I know, as much as I have this kind of love-hate relationship with captive animals and stuff like that as a child. Correct. Watching dolphin trainers work with the dolphins at the local SeaWorld and stuff, it blew my mind. And actually, speaking of that, I was out when I was a kid. I was probably about 8, 9 years old, and it was in between show times, and I witnessed one of the dolphin trainers playing catch with a ball with one of the dolphins. And I came down to watch, and the trainer was just like, "Come on over, little guy. You want to try this?" And I got to play catch with a dolphin at like 8 or 9 years old. And yeah, that was cool. Set the hooks in me even more,
And see, we didn't really understand, the animals in captivity thing, 35 years ago. It probably wasn't, as heavily considered. But it was just extraordinary, particularly, with the animals like the dolphins and just watching the way that they would interact with humans and just how incredible they were.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, those intelligent beings, being able to be trained for one thing. It's,
Yes.
it takes a high level of intelligence, and it is tough because when you have animals that are that intelligent and they're aware of their environments, it seems even tougher for the heart to enjoy seeing
Yeah.
them. But then there's also the other aspects. Like I still love going to aquariums, and there's a huge role they play when it comes to bringing awareness to people that are never going to take themselves out of those critters
Correct.
environments, and making them care for them. You watch kids fall in love with these, sea lions or whatever they are, and
Oh,
all of a sudden they care about them. They want to protect them. They
totally.
now have a new awareness.
And it's massive. I actually took my son to the Antarctic. So it's the base station that they fly out of in New Zealand to actually
Yeah.
get you down there. And they've
How
actually
cool.
got a program there where they care for penguins, in particular ones that can't be re-released into the wild
Hmm.
because they've had an injury or whatever. And so they actually take them there and they care for them and they look after them. And like my son just thought that was the coolest thing he'd ever seen,
Totally.
watching and learning about them there.
Yeah, that's what I love too. Yeah, all of our local aquariums that I know of, that's the majority of their focus. Of course they want to present these animals to the public and teach them about them, but it's usually a rescue and rehabilitation and hopefully release
Yeah.
back into the wild
Oh,
type of thing. And then some of
absolutely.
them that are never going to be able to make it back in the wild, then they end up living there and
No.
getting
And they
fat and
give them
happy.
they're made fat and happy. They give them the best life. There's no predators. Like they're just having the best time of their lives. They've won the
Yeah, yeah.
and it's
Couch
really
potato
nice, I
life.
guess. Yeah, well, it's really changed, hasn't it? In that sense that
Right.
it is now about rescue and rehabilitation, whereas it probably was just more entertainment based back when we were young
Mm-hmm.
fellas.
True.
Now, obviously, so the ocean spoke to you, but how did you end up taking pictures?
Yeah, great segue because it really, like, as I started to lose, no, I wouldn't say interest, but kind of coming to a realization that I wasn't going to go in the direction of a PhD program or something like that. It was actually, I didn't have any photography classes in my high school, which I really wish I did. But then when I first started at college or uni, as you'll
Yeah,
typically say, right? My first year there, I took my first photography course, 101, shooting massive rolls of film, developing them, and printing, 8x10s in the dark room, and just absolutely
so
fell in
cool.
love with that. And that was when I started that. My father was, he was an amateur photographer, did it for his own passion. His
Yeah,
stuff was more like street photography, portrait stuff. He handed me down his Canon AE1 that was made in '76. I got the guts rebuilt
dude.
on it, and then just started shooting that thing like crazy. And I was in love, man. And
Yeah,
then
how good's an
yeah,
81? Like that's just a great camera.
I still use it. I love it. Yeah, like when my son was born, that was the first thing I thought. I was okay. Got to go get some more rolls of black and white and start shooting
Yeah.
this thing again. Yeah, I love
Can
that camera.
Hey, funny story. I've got a Canon 1V, so like their sports film camera, their sports
Mhm.
35 millimeter camera, and I've actually taken that traveling, with the family. And some of my favorite shots that I've ever taken, like I've only got 3 or 4 photos that I've taken out of the hundreds of thousands, are
Mm.
off that camera, mate. A bit of Kodak Portra 400.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yep. Yep.
Oh, dude. Like I've got photos from when we were last in the States with him, like in, New York and on the steps where Sylvester Stallone's, doing these ones.
Yeah, the Rocky thing.
And
Yeah,
oh
totally. That's
man. And
cool.
I've got these photos of my wife and this like tiny little dude sitting there next to him, like shot on that camera in portrait. And like they're just special, aren't they?
They really are. Yeah, that was the first thing I went and I was like, can I still find plenty of Portra? And totally was able to, just
Yeah.
online. And yeah, that's what I was shooting my newborn son with a bunch too. It is special. And the process too, right? Of you really
Oh
having
man.
to be much more selective, no spray and pray type of scenarios, and you're really paying
It's a
attention to setting
yeah.
up the shot. Yeah.
It's a good thing to come back to like as a
Mm,
digital shooter. And that was actually part of the reason
sure.
I picked it up again was, sports photography, occasionally you got to do a little bit of spray and pray when things are happening. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
but, you can get sloppy where you're sort of taking, 2,000 photos a day and going, hang on,
Hmm.
this is silly.
I
Whereas
gotta
it
edit this
forces you
now.
to, yeah, could you sort of go, mate, each photo is costing me like $6. I should probably, you know, use some care and some diligence.
Totally. Totally.
Man, I'm glad you still use that. So you still shoot with the AE1 now?
Yeah. Every once in a while, it just reminded me now. It's probably been at least a year or so since I picked it up. I gotta get
Yeah,
back
dude.
on it.
Man, time to punch
Uh,
a roll through that thing.
totally.
And have you
Yeah.
got a housing for it? When did you start putting them
I
underwater?
No. Yeah, underwater came much later. I mean, for me, the underwater stuff started as simple as you can, with small point and shoots, really cheap stuff. And then, of course, with
Ah,
the development of GoPros and those came along, of course, I was doing that stuff for a while. And then
yeah.
about 10 years ago was the first time that I put a red
Cool.
underwater.
And that was
That
sort of
was,
where it started.
yeah. I mean, I was always so interested in it and total fish at the time, anyways.
Yeah.
But to finally get a professional camera in a professional housing, it was the red one in a
Ah,
Gates Underwater Products housing, the housing they made for the red one.
and
And
that's
then
how it started.
that is how it started and just ignited 100%.
Dude.
I knew right away that I needed to focus on this. I
Yeah, that
was,
was the moment. You're like,
yeah,
the window was open.
100%.
This is it. Like, go,
Yeah,
go,
yeah.
go.
Now the window's
Because like,
open. I'm jumping through it and trying to fly like
man,
Superman. If I fall, I fall, but I'm
that's
just gonna keep
because
going.
that's a time I really want to talk to you about. Because I sort
Mm.
of went, I've gone and stalked all the way back to your start of your Facebook photos,
Okay.
to go back and have a look. And one of the photos I did see was a shot of you on the red one the day before it was shipped to customers.
Mm.
Because obviously you joined Red before the product came out, back when
Yeah.
people were still, poo-pooing and going, oh, this will never work.
Sure. Or will it ever
Digital
exist?
cinema,
Period.
how
Hmm.
stupid, who are these idiots? Some
Yeah.
bloke that makes sunglasses thinks he can build a video camera. Good luck, champ. Like, what a time. Like, how did that happen? How
Yeah.
did you end up
Yeah.
at Red?
Yeah. I mean, it's just everything you just said right there, just flashbacks of like my first years at Red, all just battling
Yep.
those type of arguments and conversations. How I ended up at Red was I was working, I had a full time job at a small media house, that's local here in Orange County, California. And I was working as an editor. Started there as an assistant editor, basically logging, doing lower thirds on some of their shows, and then eventually moved myself up to editing whole shows. And how it happened was my boss was going to go to NAB, the National Association of
Yep.
Broadcasters, the big convention we have out here, and he grabbed, I want to say, like one or two of the employees from the media house to take with him to Vegas in NAB,
Right.
and I was not one of them. But when they came back, all they were talking about was this company Red. That was the 2006 NAB when Red
Yeah.
basically announced themselves, even though they didn't have a
Yep.
product yet.
We're coming.
Um,
No.
and immediately, like I was just eating up all of their information, so I just dove in research wise as much as I could, and just spent many sleepless nights just researching what's going on, following the forums, Red user.
Yeah.
Um, and realistically, how it happened was I kind of stalked Red and wouldn't leave them alone until they would give me a job. I sent an
Nice.
initial email and just said I can see that this is the future. I know where this is going. I know how important this is. I want to be part of it.
Yeah.
And they said, we really appreciate your passion, but we don't even have a product yet. So please stand by. And
Give it a minute,
hopefully
champ.
sometime in the
Pretty
future.
jet.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
and so realistically, I just kept coming after him, every couple months, just for friendly reminder, I'm still here, still interested, being
Yeah.
dedicated to the cause. And eventually they brought me in. And after three interviews, my fourth interview was sitting down with Jim Gennard, the owner and
Wow.
creator of Red. And it was a really, you can't really call it a job interview because it was a conversation and it was awesome. We sat down and we just started chatting about digital cameras and digital cinema. And at some point, 45 minutes into the conversation or whatever it was, he said, well, so do you want to see the red one prototype? And I
What?
was like, yeah,
You're like,
absolutely.
dude.
And went in the back, and there was one of the prototypes with one of the heads of engineering. And one of the guys, Brent Carter, who had initially set up my interviews, he looked at me and goes, you know what this means, right? If you're looking at this camera right now. I go, does this mean I got the job? He goes, yeah, you
Welcome
got the
to the
job. So,
family. Oh,
yeah. So,
dude,
yeah, I was
that's
employee
wild.
21. Yeah, it was wild.
Employee number 21. Holy,
Yeah.
that's madness. Because I've obviously followed all of this very closely,
Mm,
because I I obviously loved what Red did in terms of like just coming in and going, screw you all, we're
Hmm.
doing it our way. Like I
Yep,
really liked that rock and roll approach, which
me too.
can
It needed to happen to
work
the
against
industry.
you.
Let's be real. It
But
really needed to
oh man,
happen.
they came in and flipped it on its head. And
Hmm.
like, tell me about those early days. I mean, mate, you're there testing the camera because there's photos of you, like you've got it at the football, you're out, doing things with it. What was that time like? I mean, that must have been wild.
Oh, it was so wild, man. It's, there's no way I could probably keep up with the pace at my age now, but it was a blast then because
It's
we
a
were,
young man's
yeah.
game.
Oh, it was a total lifestyle for us. We would, sleep at the office quite frequently, just days and nights,
Yeah.
testing stuff and then taking it out to a shoot in the morning. Initially, I became one of the first on-set techs for these cameras, while also helping start to develop the internal tech support department. They hired me to be tech support and customer service, and so I started
Yep.
developing that
Okay.
department with Brent and a couple others, and
Yeah.
then going out to sets and trying to support these cameras being on set, both for the reason that it's brand new technology. So
Yep.
realistically, it's the first time, you've got all these working professionals that may have been in the industry for decades.
Oh
However, it's
yeah.
something they've never had their hands on. So
No.
they need a bit of guidance, but also, to be real, those out there that were with Red in the very early days know that there were some struggles. I mean, it was,
Oh dude.
like people say, bleeding edge technology. I mean,
Correct.
there was so much going on in these tiny cameras that, of course, you're gonna have some issues, and
Oh
development was
yeah.
happening so fast. So I was there to try to help fix these issues on set, and the way I see
Yeah.
it too, I was also there to take some of the heat off of the camera department that was on the productions as well, and
Absolutely.
be
Go,
someone
man, talk to that
to
guy
get
from
yelled
Red.
at.
It's his fault.
Yeah. Oh,
Wasn't me,
I
wasn't
was
me.
the red guy.
Yeah, the
Where's
red guy.
where's the effing red guy? Yeah,
Yeah, where's he, mate? You were the
he's
punching
right
bag.
behind you. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was all part of the job, but that was worth it.
But
There were
like
some
that's
wild days.
and oh man, like it's just such a hardcore story,
Mm,
to and have to be been in there, on that coal face as that technology was rolled out. Because how did you find the resistance? Like, how did you find people going this
yeah.
digital rubbish? Like,
It was tough. I mean, for one thing, 4K was never going to be a thing to people in their mind. I mean, 1080 was plenty. And I mean,
yeah,
look at where we are now, where 4K is
correct.
possibly not enough for most people. Um, I'll tell you how I found the resistance. So I'll try to make it a quick story, but one of the first
Yeah,
sets I ever went out on, and I know I could tell this story publicly because I've actually read an article where the director told the same story,
nice.
slightly different from way I remember it, but it's okay. It was Gamer with Gerard Butler, and this had to be
Yeah.
2007, I believe, is when they started shooting it. And so, first day of production, this sequence and it's the very first sequence they're going to shoot of the entire movie, and it's Gerard Butler's stunt double running down an alley. An explosion goes off next to him, and blows him to bits. It looks like, but then the director, they're amazing, Neville Dean Taylor, they like to camera operate themselves a lot, and so he
Okay.
was in a full fire retardant suit and
Oh
complete,
man.
done up, and he's going to run through the fireball after the stunt double with the camera, and then reveal that Gerard Butler's okay and goes on with
Yeah.
the fight. So basically, they run down the alley, explosion goes off. They're both running through a fireball. Like I said, he's in a fire retardant outfit. The camera is wrapped in like a plastic bag, from what I remember,
Oh,
literally
dude.
like a throw over trash bag when it rains. Camera
Uh,
cuts off during the explosion. So
oh no.
immediately there's panic and like, wait a minute, it can't take the
Oh,
concussion of things like this. This entire
oh,
movie, if you've ever seen it, the entire movie is explosions, gunfights, and things like that. So if
dude.
this camera can't take this, it's not going to work. Let's do it again. Runs through the explosion, cuts off. They do it a third time, it cuts off again. If I'm remembering the amount of times, and basically
Yeah.
the producers came to me right then and said, "Okay, so this is the thing. We're going to break for lunch. You need to look at your camera, figure out what's going on with it. We're going to try this one more time after lunch. If that camera fails again, we're pulling the 435s off of the truck, and this film is now going to be shot on film. And one of the
Yikes.
first major movies for Red is not going to
Oh
be shot on Red
no.
anymore." I'd
No
already
pressure.
Yeah, no pressure, no pressure at all. I mean, dude, there's a reason why I have so much gray hair of what hair is
Oh,
left. But
dude.
but I already had voiced my concern in what I thought it was, and it
Yeah.
didn't seem like it wanted to be listened to. But long story short is back then with Red Ones, if anybody remembers them, there was also a side record button right here. And I was saying
Ah,
that I think that's smashing against the operator's face when the explosion's going off. So
ah,
basically, we put a bunch of gaff tape over that thing at lunchtime. They came back, they shot it one more time. The camera didn't cut out because that side record button was taped
not
over,
getting hit.
and they watched playback, and everybody just uproar cheering, "Oh my god, it's beautiful, it looks so great."
Oh God.
And yeah, so the movie went on being shot on red. That night we popped off all the side record buttons, which leads to later on
Wow.
a development in the camera software where you can go into the menus and disable that side record button.
Of
So the
course.
trial by fire R&D is really what it was,
Oh,
right? Like you're figuring out
dude.
how to develop these things in the middle of a war zone, kind of.
Do you know all you've done there is you've gone on to confirm that gaff tape does indeed fix everything,
Yes,
mate.
absolutely,
What would we
absolutely.
do without gaff tape and zip ties?
That's the truth.
Oh, dude, that is actually ridiculous. I mean, because that's the sort of stuff. I mean, that's pressure when it's just your set and
Mm,
something's playing up. But when it's
yeah,
your technology on a Hollywood film, and everybody's looking at you like people want you to fail in
yeah,
the early days. Like they don't want to see the
very
young
true.
upstart get up.
Yeah,
They
very
want
true.
their poo pooing to come true for God knows what reason.
Yeah,
Like
I mean,
that's just
most people just couldn't,
brutal.
just wanted the excuses to be able to make it go away and go back to doing
Yeah,
things the way
digital
they
sucks.
used
We
to.
want film.
Yeah, and
Oh
and
man.
so I love like the ongoing early quotes and things that Jim, the founder, would always say is,
Mm,
that we all knew that digital was going to end up taking over film. Maybe not
absolutely.
entirely, but it was going to take over
Yeah,
a lot of the industry. So
for a big part.
one of his main missions was to give it a respectful replacement. Not saying that,
Yeah,
okay, 1080, 24p, that's going to be sufficient and that's a great replacement for how this beautiful 35 millimeter plus film has trained
correct.
us to see cinema our whole lives. So the
Yeah.
whole point was, well, if it's going to happen, let's make it happen beautifully. Let's give it
Yeah.
a proper next step.
And see, that is a lovely way because my understanding of Jim, again, not somebody I've met personally, but from things I've read that he's written, is he's obviously a very passionate photographer, cinematographer himself,
Yeah,
and he really did do his best to translate all of that into the company that he founded. Like that sort of formed the ethos, didn't it?
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he's a really talented photographer, and a lot of people didn't know it, but a lot of the ad campaigns for Oakley, he shot them himself, both stills and motion campaigns. And I remember him telling me that story, and I know I've heard it a couple other times, is where almost the company was almost created out of a frustration of how he would buy the leading technology from one of these big camera companies, and then 3 months later it was like, well, now we've got something better. But
Yeah,
there was no upgrade paths or anything like that like Red offered. So it was
yeah.
like, well, this has to change, and he's going to be the
Stuff
one
it,
to
doing
change
it
it. He had the
myself.
means. Yeah.
Because see, I had read that he shot a lot of his own campaigns, and I mean, a lot of
Hmm.
the Oakley stuff is so iconic. I
Yeah.
was shaped by Oakley as a brand as a young man in the '90s.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
had my sweet wraparounds. Like I was all
Yeah.
about. Like their style was just so cool, and I think that was one of the things that I really liked that they carried into the camera company. It wasn't just the Germans or the Japanese where it's just absolute precision in what they do, and it's
Mm.
very toe the line. Like I really the rock and roll style. I think that's the only thing I can ever relate it to.
Totally. Yeah,
Of the way that
I always called us a bunch of punk rock bands smashed
yeah.
into a small room,
Oh man,
with a
it's as
product to
punk rock as
deliver.
I could see. Because
Yeah.
the evolution that I truly fell in love with was the Red Epic. Like talk to me about the transition from like the Red One to the Epic. Like
Mm,
how was that? Obviously, it was a natural progression, but I mean, it felt like not just a bit cheesy, but not evolution, but full revolution.
sure. Yeah, I mean, it was a big jump. I just know when it came to internally with development wise, without me, just saying anything I shouldn't, but
Yeah.
things were really focused on trying to make everything smaller, of course, more
Yes.
efficient, but also even better quality. That was never going to be a sacrifice. It was always, let's up the ante when it comes to the quality of what we can deliver, but how
Mm,
can we make this smaller, and even cheaper at times too, right?
mm.
But when the epic bodies were being developed, if you remember that point in time, 3D had its big revolution. So that
Yes.
became a requirement out of the gate. That need this
Mm.
because the red ones were starting to be used on these big beam splitter 3D rigs.
Yeah,
Were
right.
just enormous, massive things. Those are the
Oh,
things
good
of my
then.
nightmare because as if things aren't as complicated enough. Now you've got two cameras instead of one with twice the cabling and gack and
Yeah,
accessories and all the other stuff involved. So
madness.
the epics had to be these smaller boxes that worked into the 3D world better, which for a lot of us worked into many of our worlds, the underwater
Yeah,
industry working into a housing, of course.
it
When
all
it came
makes
to the
perfect
gimbal
sense.
revolution and Steadicam revolutions, and putting them on car mounts and things like this,
Oh man.
everything just it had an advantage in that direction.
Well, it did. The smaller, lighter, and faster, became the whole thing. But look, we're probably
Hmm.
jumping forward a little bit here because you've got to
Hmm.
tell me a little bit about. So obviously, Red and Gates was a really strong partnership, and that started with
Hmm.
Red One. Like, how far into the journey was that?
Well, they met. I work really closely with Gates, and the owner John Ellerbrock owns a company with his wife Karen. He's told the story numerous times that I've heard where he was introduced to the company and introduced to Jim at the 2006 NAB
Yeah, right.
presentation, the big unveiling of what we will be. May not have a product yet, but here's some machined prototypes and they seems like they hit it off, and they're like, okay, you're the underwater guy. Let's start working
Let's
closely.
get it
And
done.
still to this day, there's a really tight relationship between Red and Gates when it comes to engineering and development of products. So they're working really closely with their product development team, which is a really brilliant team that Red has at this point right now too. And
Absolutely. And
yeah,
h- how did you insert yourself into that conversation? Because obviously you went, "Hey, I like the ocean stuff.
yeah,
Camera, ocean, me. Let me
yeah.
be the glue that holds those together." How did you manage to jump yourself in there?
I guess it would kind of be similar to the way I got the job at Red, was just
Yeah, gotcha. So you
barged
just
my
push, push,
way in and
push.
said, I'm taking
Yep.
this. I want
Hello,
this. I want,
hello. Got
yeah,
to be me.
but it was such a passion for me too, that I was already trying to network with, I'd speak with hundreds, if not, 1,000 people, uh, you know, every couple days to a week that were out there shooting reds. And when it was somebody that was out shooting nature docs, the
Mm.
natural history stuff always really was interesting to me. I might spend a little extra time on the phone with them, and picking their brain and supporting them. So I was already building a network of those
Yeah, so
folks
cool.
folks before I was even really getting involved in it myself.
Before you were the guy, you were
Yeah.
like, I can see
Hmm.
which way I want this to go.
Yeah, that, and I could tell that Red works brilliantly for so many parts of the industry. And I
Yeah.
knew, yeah, sports and stuff like that too, but I knew, like, nature, this is nature's
Oh,
baby. This is what they want. It's
oh man,
small, it's really high
absolutely.
definition with the beautiful picture, but also the high frame rates that weren't being offered on other cameras, which is
It's
just an
it's
absolute must for
massive.
nature stuff.
Because yeah, who the hell wants to be working a big film camera out in the jungle or attempting to? I've seen some of the big boxes where they've tried, film cameras underwater and stuff. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
correct, but oh man, that
Yeah,
looks
yeah,
terrible.
I'd love to touch on that because, yeah, in my earliest days, so John Elbrock, owner of Gates, is one of my really close friends to this day, but also a
Yeah.
mentor to me. And he introduced me to a lot of folks, including Bob Cranston, rest in peace, Bob, legend.
Mm.
And he was a big, big pioneer of digital filmmaking underwater and 3D as well. So Bob Cranston and Howard Hall, two of the biggest names in the industry, and they were close working partnership for a long time. And they would shoot IMAX film beam splitter 3D rigs underwater. And if I remember right,
Dude.
the things were like, I think I remember Bob saying they were about 1,200 pounds But I'm
Oh,
sorry, I'm pounds over here in the States, whatever kg that is. Um, but yeah, you got these big cranes that you'd have to bring it into the water with. Bob and Howard would be on rebreathers down there. They get, a minute or whatever, few seconds of roll time, and then they'd have to send the rig back up with a diver to get the film reloaded, and then it would have to come back down with a new diver so they weren't getting anybody bent and decompression
yeah,
sickness. So they'd have to switch out their support. So all that fast forwards then to the Gates version of this
yes,
is a beam splitter rig for the epics.
yeah,
And 1,200 pounds went to about 300 pounds, but tiny. You're talking about the old IMAX rigs were the size of like a VW Beetle, something like that.
yeah. Just silly, and that's what I'd seen was like these things were just monstrous. And it's one
Mm.
thing on a set where you've got explosions going off, and it's all a bit. But for people working in that nature documentary, they'd just be like going, "Oh, you've saved me."
What a whole new set of logistics, right? And just and those type of things just really limit your possibilities. You
Well,
have to
they
start
do.
working around the limitations and versus
Yeah,
what would be a perfect thing to shoot and how to shoot it, but we can't.
yeah, because it just won't work. And I guess that would have been so. Obviously, you had the red one underwater,
Hmm. Yep.
and how did that go? How did that go? Like the first times, you took it.
I mean, I was fixated on it immediately. It went great. That was by the time I got the red one underwater, it was right when Gates was finishing development on a housing for the Epic.
Right.
And so I was lucky enough to get a transition really quickly into that. And it led to me making the first of a series of videos I did for Red, where it was basically before the camera comes out or right after it
Yep.
comes out, get it underwater. And it's the first ever seen underwater footage of these cameras, kind of a test case
So
scenario.
cool.
And that was the first one I did for them. I called it Water Breathing Dragon. And it was with Bob Cranston and Johnny
Mm.
Friday, who was a close friend as well. And we went out to the local island here, Catalina,
Cool.
and we were trying to find the opalescent squid spawning. And we just, the trip was close to over, and then we just landed right on it. And just, you're talking about these squids spawning by the billions,
Oh man.
shooting it both in day and night. And it was just the most surreal, mind blowing thing I've ever seen. And that I was already hooked the second I was started shooting underwater, but that
Yeah.
trip right there and that shoot, and then me coming back and I edited it myself, and tried to direct
Dude.
the whole piece myself. That's when I knew, well, this is what I'm gonna do. This is it.
Yeah.
That I just went to this. I just went to outer space in my mind, and
Yep.
and this is where I want to keep going back to.
You're like, this is it. This is my jam. And
Yeah.
like, what a time. So, the start of the Epic, because the Epic, I think, was the time when Red, really transformed from, some new whiz bang, good luck to you, to hang on a second,
Mm,
like this, not mucking around here. Because the
yeah.
thing that I remember, because I was shooting motorsport at that time, and I went over to the American series Formula Drift. They were doing stuff in Southeast Asia, and one of the dudes who was shooting there had his red Epic in like 2010 shooting drifting. And like drifting, it's not considered top tier motorsport here. Again, it's a bit rock and roll. And like I
Mm,
remember watching him work and watching the footage that camera produced, and I'm just there banging around with my stills camera, and I remember looking at that tiny little camera package and then what he was producing with it and going,
mm.
man, one day, like
That's
one
it.
day.
Yeah. Yeah. You know where you were going. Yeah, for
Oh
sure.
man, it was just like it was just what they could make with it, like the quality and the style and the look. It was just like nothing I'd ever seen. And having again having a small camera package that was like portable, but also just the highest quality you could achieve. Because you think about like an Alexa back then, I mean, man, it was like a Besser block with a lens on the front of it.
Mm,
Like
yeah,
that is not something that you'd take to the local drift track to film some cars, at high frame rate,
sure, sure.
blazing past you at 100K an hour.
all
Like
good for
that
the
was,
typical shoulder mount. But yeah, I mean, it became a whole new
oh
style of
yeah,
shooting where people did this kind of right to the chest and, you know,
yeah, the
that type of
handheld,
thing
and
where the
you
hand,
get it in there, and
yeah.
you're in with the action, but you're in there, with a cinema camera. And that was
Mm,
when I remember like Red Bull started, shooting stuff with it, and they were doing like extreme sports stuff with it. And this was probably closer to 2012 or thereabouts. And like
mm-hmm.
I just remember seeing like wild stuff being done. It was all still, a little bit out there in traditional land, but I've never been super interested in traditional land. I've always
Yeah.
liked, that bleeding edge stuff and where that goes, because that would have been
Yes,
when,
man.
in terms of your work on sets, where it was being, because what was it? Spider-Man was 2012-ish, wasn't it, or thereabouts? Was that Epics or
Oh God, it all
trying to
bleeds
remember?
together. It was epics. Yeah, it was. It was
Yeah,
actually one of the. I want to say it was before that because it was one of the very first shows the epics were on, and I mean this was the earliest days of development in them, and they immediately had to work on 3D beam splitter rigs, and there was constantly like 4 rigs working at once, if not more.
yeah.
That yeah, I don't know how that didn't kill a lot of us, but myself and Nate Hart spent a lot of time on that set too, and we would basically go work 12, sometimes 14-hour days or whatever it was on set, and
Oh,
come
dude.
up with the list of maybe issues we saw, but a lot of times more so just things that need to be integrated into the software, things that need to
Yeah.
change, things that are just going to help the workflow on set. And as we're sending that in while we're on set, the engineers are developing this new software. We get done with our big long day on set, and then we go back to the lab, pop in the new
Wow.
firmware, and then retest the things we saw happening there, and try, and sleep never type of.
Man,
So speaking of Red Bull, there was a lot of Red Bulls that happened.
that, but like,
Yeah,
that's wild times. Like that really
yeah,
is. Like it's still, as I said, like that is young man's work. That is not
totally.
something, going from film sets to the lab
Yeah,
to back
there was
again. Man,
there
that
was so
is,
much energy that was created though because we knew what we were doing too, and
yeah.
of course the pressure of the situation is going to keep you awake no
Oh,
matter what. But also, it was just
absolutely.
we all just had so much drive and passion for the company
Yeah.
that it was,
Just
it
just to
kept us
make it
going.
work.
Hmm.
Oh man. Like it just blows me away, hearing all these stories. Because as I sort of said, I was just a whippersnapper trying to find my feet. And obviously you're watching all these things from afar, that are going on. Now, with the R&D, I also saw that you were pivotal in assisting the development of the underwater OLPF.
Oh yeah,
Do you want to tell me a little bit about that? How that sort of came to be as you went
sure.
underwater and you went, oh, hang on a sec.
Yeah, that was definitely an obsession for at least a few years,
Yeah.
and dove into a bunch of studies that were new to me. And I've mentioned it before, and love to mention again that I had the guidance of some really smart people out there, like Dave Blackham from Esprit Films, and John Shaw over in your neck of the woods.
Okay.
He's an Aussie, and these folks were already doing the early work that was leading me in the right direction of what we were trying to
Right.
solve was, especially with the Dragon sensor in Epic, you ended up getting a UV cross contamination in
Right.
blue water, or it's when you're shooting underwater, everything changes. And one of the most important things is as you go deeper, after you are a couple meters deep, there's zero red light left from the spectrum. It's filtered out by the water. And
Yeah,
as you go
right.
deeper and deeper, right, the different colors of the spectrum disappear. That's why when we look down into water, we see blue typically. That's
Yeah.
not because the water's blue. It's because that is the most color that will penetrate that deep into that
Really?
water through the light. Yeah. So basically everything else is filtered out down at depth besides the blue. That's the
Oh,
only thing left. So I'll try not to go off on too much of a tangent on this, on
man, I love
a
this. This is great.
nerd
Hey.
based tangent, but
Oh,
but
man.
yeah,
No, no.
basically what would happen is this crystal clear blue water, especially that of like the Caribbean and things like this. And
Yeah.
really, if it had a bit of sediment in it too, it highlighted it, is that water would turn a bit magenta-ish. Everybody started calling
Oh,
it the dreaded magenta issue. And it wasn't just
ah.
a red thing. It wasn't just a
No.
red thing, but CMOS sensor thing in general. And it seemed like Dragon struggled with it more than any of the sensors we
Gotcha.
had before or since. So
Mm.
yeah, basically we ended up developing this optical low pass filter. With that system, you could unscrew the optical low pass filter and put in a new one, depending on what effect you wanted out of it.
Yeah.
And this one had a UV cut at a certain point in the spectrum and a couple other secret sauce little tidbits
Of
thrown into
course.
it that would help kind of remedy this issue. But again, some of this was done by me following the footsteps of people that went before me and were using these UV cut filters. I would
Yeah.
start, I would, it was terrible, terrible part of the job where Red had to send me out to Cayman Islands to go on a dive trip
Oh,
for a week. And
mate.
I would sample
Because
these
I mean, that's
different
the only place you
filters.
can test. I mean, you can't do this in the swimming pool, can you?
Yeah, no, not at
You
all.
know,
It had to be, it
you got to
had to
be
be
in situ.
done. Okay, guys, I'll take this one for the team. I'll
Oh,
go out
right.
go out on a dive trip to Cayman Islands, and but then I would send this data back, after diving all day, and sometimes shooting fun stuff to try to come up with a proof of concept video to put out, but also shooting
Yeah.
chip charts, shooting color charts, and things like that underwater. To then that evening send back to our engineers and our color scientist Graham Natras, absolute brilliant mind, and he
Oh,
would
yeah.
he would mix it into his magical cauldron and figure out solutions mathematically for it, and apply that to basically what the the hardware engineers could put into a physical
Yep.
piece of hardware, that optical low pass filter. But then also at the same time he was figuring out how to change the color science that he is applying
Of
in
course.
camera,
To
to both
match that.
optimize the good characteristics and to make sure we're kind of negating some of the ones we wanted to get rid of.
And see, that's wild. And I think one of the other things I've always really loved about Red is how people, like Graham, are really involved, in the community and speak about what they do and like are known. It's not just the R&D department that you hide in the basement. It's how
Mm,
active these, all these people
yeah.
are and how critical they've been, in working together. Because again, without you doing that work and without the people that, came before you but you all bring it together and you do it in, I guess, such a collaborative fashion. And you're going to
Mm.
tell me, like, how many goes did it take till you went, oh, this is about right? I mean, what's the time period?
I mean, I can't even imagine what Graham went through, and then our other, the other folks on our engineering team, because that's where all the the work really ended up happening. I was out there collecting the data, and try to present them the worst case scenarios I could, and then best case scenarios, and
Yeah.
then they did the computing, if you will. They did the real math and the real work to figure out, okay, what are we seeing? Why are we seeing this get better? Why are we seeing this get worse? And then
Mm.
over time, it took a couple of years, and I want to say, like, I started really concentrating on that project, and by the time we had release of one, it was almost about a 3-year period. But
Wow.
it was, going and doing sample images with these off the shelf filters that we knew were
Yep.
helping improve. And then going back then with our prototype of what we thought was going to work, and bringing that all back to the lab and figuring out, did we get it? Did we nail it? But fast forward, I know that those filters, I've been told, help play a big part in some of the biggest BBC blue chip underwater stuff that, was kind of the big re-revolution. I feel like we had a big re-revolution, like with Blue Planet 2 and
Unreal.
around that time,
Oh,
and
definitely.
Planet Earth 2 and all that stuff, where
Oh, yeah.
um
Well, you
you
gave the
got
tools to
so
make
much
it
more
easier.
interest again.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, nothing they do is easy, but hopefully we helped improve it a
Oh,
tiny bit and could check one
and
thing
you'll note
off the
the
list.
easier. Because what's
Right,
crazy
yeah.
is me as somebody who like has enough trouble with cameras, above the water. The only thing I ever think about is like how you'd not get water in the housing. That's like I,
Mm.
I never think about anything beyond that because I look at
Yeah.
going putting this thing in a housing, then taking it underwater, and I'm like, dude, if it gets like 2 drops in there, it's game over. So
Yeah.
I've never really even gone into the depths because I'm too scared to even,
Yeah.
unless it's a GoPro and like you've bought the housing for it. I'm like, look, I can do with, if I burn $500, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, you have a similar
Man,
viewpoint to most people who are
yeah,
cinematographers, working professionals, honestly. And sometimes that's, I
terrifying.
have to I have to walk folks through some steps at times, because, like, with me, I don't rent my housing and my camera gear out without me going at
No,
least as a housing tech if I'm not being hired as a camera operator.
absolutely.
And immediately that is the initial perception is like, right, okay, because we don't want to flood it. You don't want us to mess up your camera or your housing. I said, well, I could teach you how not to do that pretty
Yeah,
quickly. But even if that doesn't happen, there are a million other little things that will blow your shoot because you just
correct.
haven't done this over and over and you haven't gone through the
Yeah,
trial and errors.
you don't have the
And
experience,
yeah.
and that's, as you said, it's that baptism of fire where you've just done so much of it where things have gone wrong, and you've gone, I know a workaround.
Yeah,
That's
I definitely can't say I've seen it all, and I don't want to see it all. Hopefully, but I've seen some weird things happen. Yeah.
Oh man, I can honestly only imagine. And like the launch of well, actually, before I go there, there's one other thing I wanted to touch on with you: the Red Collective videos.
Mm.
Now, if I recall correctly, you had a pretty big hand in the making of the Red Collective videos. Do I have
Yeah,
an accurate
a handful
recollection of
of
that?
them. Yeah, I didn't go out on all of them, but some of the greatest times I read for me. Yeah. Um, the first one I did with the crew was Brandy Casagrande. We did. I believe that was the first
Yeah.
one I did with them. Then we did one on Paul Nicklin, and then we did one on who we called the Wilds, Shannon and Russ.
Yep.
And yeah, that one we went to. We spent a week in Komodo National Park out in Indonesia filming Komodo dragons, and then spent the next week in Borneo, um, optically hunting orangutan. And yeah,
So
that
cool.
it was definitely one of the most grueling, hard shoots. Like dirtiest, gnarliest, nastiest, most uncomfortable thing ever, and greatest time ever too. At the same time, it was such a
Always.
fun shoot, but a lot of grueling environments, but it was a blast. Yeah, and it's beautiful too.
Mate, it is, because I've got to tell you, like, as somebody that was, just getting serious about, taking part in that ecosystem, those Red Collective videos in particular, like, mate, they were a massive inspiration to me in those early days. I was like, dude, I want my own Red Collective video. Like, that was like, if you could work your way into a point where they like actually wanted to make something
Yeah,
about what you do, I'm like, man, that's like the pinnacle. That is so cool, because they
I
were just so
know
special. Because I watched
they
that, and it
were.
was just, man, it was just creators like doing their thing and,
Mm.
taking the tools and then doing what mattered to them. And I'm like, this is just
Yeah,
amazing.
and it was always a big focus of ours to not ever make it feel like a commercial for Red, to not
No,
like we never even prompted people to talk about the product or things like
no,
that. If that came up organically because they wanted to talk about something that makes their life easier, better, or has helped them achieve something, that's great. But it was really about telling their story. And then
yes,
you're gonna see some of the footage that they've shot in their career with the camera. It sells itself because you don't need
it
to, and to me, like it was such a brilliant marketing device, but it was so much more than that. It's and telling some of those certain stories was similar to telling pieces of the Red story. Because there's
it,
so many
it
of you
was.
all out there, yourself included, that just have these brilliant stories, and that's what created Red. It's the community.
Yeah. It's
It
the
both.
mad passion. Like exactly
Yeah,
the same with
totally.
you, the dude that just wouldn't go away until you got a job. Like
Right. Yeah.
you just want to, and that was the thing that I think really drew me into it as well, was I'm like, these people, like I don't know, it was so much more, like it was less about the gear and more about the creator, and
Mm.
enabling the creator to just go out and do their thing. And I just love that. Like that series was so inspirational for me. Like you've got no idea how many times I watched and rewatched every single one of those videos. Like, before I'd even met you. Yeah, like fully
Oh,
obsessed,
cool.
because I'm like, this is, burning into my brain, that level of work, going, man, this is where I want to go.
Mm. Love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
It was
It
just, yeah,
worked.
like just a wild ride, because
Yeah.
DSMC2 came along. That was where I sort of jumped into the Red ecosystem. So I
Hmm.
was part of the helium upgrade when that, I'd put money down, and then they went, hey, guess what? We're making this 8K thing. And I'm like, sweet baby Jesus. I don't even know what I'd do with 8K, but man, I want
But I
that.
think I need it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, I totally want that. And they gave us it was a super, like it was a discounted price to jump up to that camera because we'd put our
Hmm.
deposit in so early.
Yeah, I
But like,
remember. Yeah,
I've got to tell you this story because I've got to share this with you. Um,
please.
because obviously, like, it was full blown madness for me to buy that camera at that point in time. Because like I have no film training, I didn't know how to use one. I'd never used one. I literally had just, watched people use them and gone, I just want that. Like, I'm like, if you want to work with the best, you got to aim for that, and you got to, try to use the best tools that you can put in your hand. And
Sure.
that was it. Like, absolute madness. Like, no true, yeah, yeah. Like, it was all just emotion. It was the vibe, which is yeah,
It
a
seems
little bit.
like it worked out though. But that's the thing.
Dude,
It's if
it's worked out pretty good.
yeah, and that's the thing is, yeah, a tool's a tool, right? But if
Yeah,
you
it
have the
is. Like,
passion,
what
you
you do
have the
with it.
drive, and you have the creativity and know-how, you are going to put that tool to work to make
Oh man.
beauty. You know,
Yeah,
it's going to
and
happen.
that was the whole thing, was I got it, and then I'm like, all right, well, I can't embarrass myself with this.
Hmm,
And that was how I got in. I did Reducation, and that was,
hmm,
I met, Steve and John, who came out to Australia and ran that for us. And one of the craziest things that happened at that, and this is, a lot of my story is because of, my time there, was I was at Reducation with, those wonderful fellas teaching us how to use the camera. And sitting next to me was this dude, Tim Bonathan. And
Oh
and
yeah,
I'm like, how do I, because he was
yeah,
telling me about the surfing stuff he did. And like back in, I think it was 1998 or 99, I can't remember. It was like Biggest Wednesday was the film that he produced. And again, I'm a bit of a beach bum surfy myself. And
yeah.
Matt, I remember watching Biggest Wednesday. I was staying up at Caloundra. I was at the beach, and like me and one of my dudes were like, we're there watching this thing, and I'm like, holy shit. Like, imagine shooting,
Hmm.
big waves, like just the craziest thing I've ever seen. And then sitting next to me in that room, 15 years later, is the man that made the film that I was watching as a
Yeah,
teenager.
I
And
consider
you're
him to
like,
be probably the biggest legend in filmmaking history. I mean, we maybe have to take Bruce Brown Endless Summer version,
yeah,
that
oh
older
man,
version out of
summer,
the
like that
scenario, but
was,
it's like, yeah, Tim is an
and like he's
absolute
still pumping
legend,
it out now. Like the man's,
killing it,
the man is a
killing it.
weapon. And
Hmm.
I was, and this is what happened with my, my dive into the red world, was like just the craziest stuff kept happening, because what it did was, for somebody, that sort of had no path into that world, it opened doors that didn't exist previously.
Hmm.
And I found myself, in a room with people that, knew what they were doing, knew what they were talking about. And by osmosis, like, you start to learn, because you start, everyone was so cool with it. Like, there was
Yeah.
no, and I know this is different depending on personalities, but there was no sort of real pulling of rank. People would just, they were all high level creators that just wanted to make beautiful work. And I love that. Like, I love that so much. And that was, I think that was one of the things that really, really pushed me, was that, I'm like, I want to do, I want to respect these tools, and, again, do beautiful work with this stuff.
Yeah,
But
that's not a one-off story too, because I love that you had that experience, and I know some people that went to education multiple times, not
yeah.
because they'd forgotten what they learned, or wanted to just brush up or see what they could learn new, but also from the networking perspective.
Oh
I
man,
watched so much networking happen through that program. It's,
totally.
it's really cool.
Because, like, it's it's such a commitment to, again, to buy into that ecosystem. So
Mm,
the people that are there, and it's the thing that I've come to appreciate in, any world I've spent a lot of time in. And, motorsport and musical theater, hilariously, are two of the places I've spent a lot of time. And the people that are at the pinnacle of those things, like, there's nowhere else I'd rather be. And it's exactly
mm,
the same in terms of, operators, cinematographers. Again, I'd say it to anyone that'll listen, it's a complex life choice. So, if you've had the capacity to turn that into something that pays your way, like, you're all in, you are fully
mm,
committed, you are
mm,
not there for the stroke of the ego. You are there because
mm.
there is nothing else in this world that you would rather be doing.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you wouldn't make it past the first few months if it wasn't
Oh
for the
man.
right reasons, right? The first
No.
couple knockdowns, if you will, and things like that, because they'll happen.
Yeah. Oh, dude.
Yeah,
It
you have
because
to be all in with the heart for sure.
yeah, because the learning curve was exponential. And look, one of the things I've got to jump to that is, around that sort of time, mate, working with David Fincher, Mindhunter, you,
Mm,
you got to, mate, how was that experience? Because I watch
yeah,
something that I love about his work. And again, I can watch at a distance, so I don't have to deal with anything else. But like the precision that
yeah.
man
He's
chooses to work with
It's a good
astonishes
word to
me.
use because he's got to be the most precise film director I've ever worked with, and
Yeah.
notorious for it. Yeah, I spent a lot of time around him, with him, um, and from House of Cards, I worked on multiple seasons there. Gone Girl, um, Girl with the Dragon Tattoo a little bit, and
Yeah.
and then Mindhunter was out there for a bit of that as well. He is an absolute genius. I mean, there's
Yeah.
no other way to put it.
Oh,
There's so many stories that go around about how tough it might be to work for him because it is a very precise vision and it will be executed um,
correct.
the way he needs it to be done. But then also, even if I'm working with some of these crews that are like, I am miserable working on this show. You come to a week or two later, and they're like, I've never been better at my job than I am
So
right
good.
now because David's helped get me there.
Yeah, mate, he whips you
Yeah,
into line. It was stuff like one,
yeah.
one of the oh man, one of the things that blew me away that I read was there was a curb in
Hmm,
one of the shots, and it had an access part so that an all
yeah,
abilities access, and
yeah.
he actually had that cloned out because at that point in time the curb wouldn't have looked like that.
Yeah, because of Disability Act. The ADA is what we
Yeah.
call it in America, the Disability Act, where basically now every sidewalk has to have some kind
Yes.
of ramp going down for wheelchair access. And that's the thing. Maybe some folks would never even think about that, but even if they
No.
thought about it, they're like, well, I'm not going to change that. How much time
No.
and money is that going
What
to
a pain in the
spend? But
ass.
that's every single aspect of something. But there's something truly special about him because his his vision is so precise, but also it's so well thought out all the way down the line to where like somebody
Yeah.
could ask him the most random question because something just changed, something fell over or something broke or the lighting just changed and a major decision needs to happen. And anybody else, they'd be like, David, this happened, what do we do about this? And anybody else would have to look at it, process, okay, let me think. He has an answer immediately. It's like I watched him do that
Amazing.
multiple times where somebody would ask him a question and no matter how complex the situation, he would fire off an answer so immediately that you just knew everything is so well thought out and precise
Yeah.
in his vision and how he wants everything executed that he doesn't have to think about anything. It comes natural.
And that's
Yeah,
just the
he's a
crazy.
wizard.
Yeah, and I think that that's the best bit about getting to be around these sort of people is getting to watch their work and watch their style and watch how
Mm,
they watch what influences them and watch what drives them. And that
sure.
was where I also had to ask you about you're obviously involved on set with Game of Thrones, and you got to tell me a little bit about what it was like to be part of, I mean, that's modern day epic, modern day, just
Totally is.
phenomenal storytelling. That was
Yeah.
real game changing stuff. I mean, that's like when The Sopranos came out or The Wire or, like
Yeah.
beautiful long form, just gorgeous. And then, that obviously took it up to a whole other level. Like what stood out to you being part of that?
I mean, the part I was out there for was one of their biggest scenes, and I can never remember the episode, but it's basically where the White Walkers and the Wildlings and everybody clash and fight, and it's the biggest battle scene of the entire series.
Yeah.
Um, the episode's just slipping my mind right now, but it was one of the most intense on-set environments I've ever been in. It was great. I was there for multiple reasons. They wanted to use my water housing, and so I was teching the water housing for them,
Yeah.
building some things into it to make it work the way they wanted to. And but then on top of that, at that point it was a mixed bag of what cameras they were using. But that at that point they started really starting to heavily go towards putting a lot of reds on set. And then for
Yes.
this giant battle scene, I mean, they had, gosh, I wish I could remember the accurate number, but I want to say it was like 17 um, read epics on set, on the
Wow.
cranes, people running, people dressed in full costume, so they're part of the
Yeah.
battle scene. But what you can't see is
Oh,
they've
but with
actually got a camera in their hand, so
oh,
there's the
dude.
POV style stuff like that. It was gnarly. Yeah, I mean, to say the least. We watched somebody, I gotta say, almost die, where there's a point in the battle scene where all the wildlings are going and running off this dock and jumping into this big boat to try to escape, and these boats are made out of real legit timber that they look like they could weigh a ton, they at
Yeah.
least. And so when the last person jumps in to flip the boat over, they've got a
Uh,
full-size construction crane overhead that just pulls two wires and
oh,
flips the thing
wow.
over. So first take they did, it knocked somebody out cold and he's trapped under the boat. Luckily they
Oh,
have
dude.
plenty of safety divers in the water who
Of
run
course.
and get him
Never
out.
die.
He's totally unconscious still, after
Wow.
being underwater. They get him. No, luckily didn't have to resuscitate him, but you saw the look on his face like he'd just seen the light, or maybe lack
Oh,
thereof, which might be even more
that's a tough
disturbing.
day at the office.
Yeah, so that happened on that first take of that shot, and then there was like,
Ugh.
okay, that cannot happen. This, that, and the
Yeah,
other. We,
that's fairly stressful.
but we're gonna try it one more time.
One more time and
They
go,
did it
and
one more
then we're
time.
going to do one for safety. Ah!
Yeah, exactly. It was
Just one more
intense.
time.
Yeah,
Oh
it
God,
was
it's good to see
intense.
that that
Yeah,
happens on every set.
yeah. I came back with pneumonia that I had for like 2 months after that shoot. It was, yeah,
Oh
we're
man,
up to our ankles, if not knees deep in mud every single day, like an hour and a half north of Belfast, Northern Ireland, and wild, like in a rock quarry, just rugged situations.
that's ridiculous. And so
It was,
I mean, you've got a fairly phenomenal breadth of the work that you've done, in terms of the sorts of stuff that you've been on, from the nature to doco to, run and gun to, sort of as big as you can get. And then, the part that I really want to lead into is, towards your work, because you've obviously, now with, base film and, a lot of the work that you're doing now, I really want to lead into how it came to be that you managed to get yourself onto Ocean X for their maiden voyage.
mm,
Is that a
yeah,
similar knocking on the door story, or did they come and talk to you?
sort of, but no, they came to me, but it was also after a long relationship with them, I guess. Um, Before Ocean X existed, it was Aleutian Productions, which,
Yeah.
if you've seen Blue Planet 2, the opening episode where David Attenborough is standing out on the front of a beautiful research vessel, that was the Aleutian. And so I worked with them a couple times. Oh gosh, this has to be 6 years ago or something like that, maybe no
Yeah.
more than that now. And it was helping integrate the camera systems in the submarines. That was also being helped by John L. Brock from Gates. And so I worked with them back then, and then continued talks with them throughout the years about certain projects. And then came to be, yeah, it after leaving Red, it was, I was trying to make it known that I'm trying to go full pedal to the metal when it comes to the freelance world. And they came to me with something I regrettably had to say no to, and
Oh,
then came back to ask me, okay, so that was a test run, that was kind of a working out the kinks thing, but now that we've done that, we're about to have our maiden voyage. It's in the Red Sea, in a part of the Red
yeah.
Sea, which is in Saudi Arabian waters, off of Neom, which is this really interesting story in itself that I won't get too far into. But it's it's ocean area that has been inaccessible, let's say, to
Yeah.
science, to outsiders up until this time, and they were trying to open it up and allow science to come in and do research and allow us to document this. That was an amazing trip. Yeah, it was. Overall, we were on board for about 7 weeks or so.
Wow.
I did like 43 days of diving, scuba
Wow.
diving, where I was probably doing 2 to sometimes 4 dives a day. When I wasn't doing that, yeah, I was in the submarines operating, you know, two cameras, one with a macro lens, one with the wide lens, and it's basically, you're working with these big giant kind of gimbals and follow focus units And if I wasn't doing that, then I was on board possibly operating the camera that was on the ROV. And we
Yeah.
discovered amazing amounts of new species, but also like shipwrecks. And
Oh wow.
that's when I got my really first taste of truly brand new archaeological findings and
Man,
filming
that's like
those.
Indiana Jones stuff there. Like you're
Oh, I
like
mean,
for the first
we all
time.
want to be explorers, right? Like that's
Man, who doesn't want
especially
to
as
be
a
it, man? I want the hat and the whip, and I want to go and
totally,
find the unknown.
totally. I mean, as a
Dude,
kid, you want to be an explorer, you want to be an
totally.
astronaut, and I felt like doing both of them. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah,
we were literally looking at something that nobody's ever seen before,
nobody's
and
seen.
I'm film not only and I'm also filming it for the first time, and some of them I know
Wow.
still haven't been filmed again since. But
Wow.
I've been back to that area a couple times. I actually just got back 3 weeks ago now, maybe a little over 2 weeks
Yeah.
ago, from the same area doing kind of similar work. It's more commercial work, but also at the same time, you're focused around these new sites and these new areas that haven't been filmed before.
Oh man, that like, and I can only imagine, like the buzz on the ship, each time,
Mm.
there's because how many people are on board? Like, how big is the crew
Oh
on?
boy.
On?
Hundreds for sure, but I'm trying to just remember how many scientists there were, because there was,
Yeah.
I want to say there was like 40 something scientists.
Yeah. Wow.
I was the only underwater specific camera operator on board, which was
Right.
quite a treat and an amount of pressure as well. But
Oh yeah.
um, and
Because who else do
then
you talk camera tech with? I mean, like that's
yeah,
whenever we're on the
yeah.
job, all we do is we sit around and we talk cameras.
Well, sure. And then there's some topside crews, and some of the big stories they were trying to tell were following the scientists and the research they were doing out
Yeah.
there. So you'd have some topside crew following them,
Ah,
and then
cool.
I would follow
Oh, so
them
you still got someone
underwater.
to talk tech with.
Yeah, we
That's important.
still yeah, shop talk. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's important.
We still could nerd out, but yeah, it was incredible.
Because it does, like that stuff that I've seen of I've seen photos of you in the submersible and yeah, operating down under the water. Because I mean, how do you find like what's the transition between when you're working obviously holding a housing to then work? Is it similar to like doing helicopter work, or what's the
Yeah.
translation there?
Yeah, definitely. Cameras mounted on the outside of a submarine feels a lot like helicopter work. Just
Yeah,
not as rapid. The gimbals and I love doing heli work too, like aerials and then like a nice shot of a
yeah,
rig. But that's
mate,
fast and
that's
reactive and
killer.
just
Yeah,
so smooth. Whereas the submarine stuff, the way we were doing it at the time, at least, it's typically you're framing your shot and then you're communicating with the sub pilot and letting the sub do a lot of the work. So
oh right,
whereas in aerial work, a lot of times we let the gimbal do the movement and the position, the panning and the tilting or whatever the planned shot is. Whereas a lot of times I would try to get ourselves framed where we are now, where we want to be, communicated with the sub pilot. And a lot of times we would let the sub do a lot of the motion work. Or
yeah,
then if it
right,
was the macro stuff, a lot of times it was just trying to get the sub settled, sitting still, not scaring a critter, or
of
working.
course.
We had lights that would come out on a retractable
Yeah,
track
yeah, out
and
off the
things like that,
side.
and
Yep.
try to backlight pieces of coral. They discovered all kinds of new species of coral in the area. Discovered some brine pools, shipwrecks, like I was saying, crazy stuff.
Shipwrecks would be cool. Like when you see that under the
Mm.
water, like that. Were you under? Were you when
There
you came
was a
across
couple.
those
There was
things? Or?
multiple times. Yeah.
Wow.
But without saying too much about one, it was
No, of
definitely one of
course.
the biggest archaeological finds we had. We saw the artifacts,
Yeah.
and we were filming the artifacts. And then when we went back down a second time, I kind of tried to follow the path of the artifacts, and then I saw the outline of a ship. I saw
Wow.
the ship basically like a triangular
Oh man.
shape of a ship. And at this point, I'm still a little bit above it. I'm about 15, 20 meters above it. And I know that thing is probably at about, let's say 30 meters. And we're on nitrox, which is a mixed
Yeah.
blend where it's a high amount of oxygen. So there's a certain point where you can't go deeper
No.
than your maximum operating depth, or else you
Yeah.
get oxygen poisoning
Yeah.
basically and die.
Quite bad.
So I could tell that's pretty close to my MOD right there, but got down to it and got closer and could tell there were wood beams, and then found the anchor And
Wow.
at this point, I'm trying to communicate in hand signal, in very excited hand signals.
You go,
What I'd find totally, and I'm trying to say, like, as we were coming back up a little
yeah,
bit, trying to get out of that
yeah,
depth and start working towards the artifacts again. I'm trying to tell them, like, look, you look
down
here. You
here,
see the
yeah,
shape. You see
yeah,
the shape,
there's
and nobody got it until we got back on board, and I pulled up the footage, and they're like,
yeah,
look.
like,
Oh,
whoa.
there it is. Yes, that's a ship. Okay. But yeah, that was an amazing moment. That
That's
was
just
that was
phenomenal. Like
wild.
your other thing, you'd be down there going, mate, I hope I'm not like tripping balls down here because,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, especially
maybe I'm
you do
just coming
get
in
you
the
get
mist. I'm like,
narcosis. Yeah.
am I seeing
It's a,
things or is that
yeah.
like, is that what?
Yeah. Yeah. Narcosis is often referred to as like being a little bit drunk. So yeah, you do kind of have to
Yeah,
question yourself. But
correct. And going, am
once
I
I
seeing
found the
something or is,
anchor, once I found the anchor,
uh,
it was
you
it
go
was
that, look,
it was a good personal moment. I'm like, okay, I'm okay.
it's definitely an anchor.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
now, look, one of the other things I've got to run past you is I am
Excuse me.
always
Sorry.
super impressed when you post photos of the work that you're doing in the big tanks with NASA.
Oh, cool. Yeah,
Like,
that's
yeah, man, the NASA stuff is just cool. I mean, that, you know, whenever I see that, and, obviously I know that there's so much that goes in, and, this is the highlight reel stuff, and there's so much that goes into making all this happen. But man, when I see those moments, I'm like, go, man, like, that is like rock and roll. That is so
uh,
cool.
you
It's
said it though. Yeah,
imagining that phone call.
you don't post the bad times typically. Yeah.
No, mate, no, you never do. It's the highlight reel.
Yeah.
But it's imagining that phone call going, "G'day, Sean. This is NASA. Can you come and teach the astronauts some stuff?" And you're like, "Did that
Uh,
just happen?"
it is the
Like,
coolest environment. Yeah.
that is
I
the
honestly
coolest.
like
And literally go into space. And
I
this
try to
is
keep I try to keep
yeah.
myself
You're
in
like,
check and not get too
yeah,
just blown away by the moments
just
I find myself in, but
fanboy all the stuff.
that's pretty hard not to just totally
Oh
geek out.
man,
Yeah, the first time I went there was about 8 years ago, and it was for a total different purpose than the last couple of times I've been. Um, where 8 years ago I was there to film for a documentary called "A Year in Space." It was produced by Time,
yep,
formerly Time Magazine. Um, they ended up selling it to PBS or however that works. It ended up winning an Emmy, which was really cool too. But that was the first time I was there, and we're filming Scott Kelly's last training sessions in the tank before he is
right,
about to leave for Kazakhstan, go get
yeah,
in quarantine, and then go into space for an entire year. First person to ever do it. And it just surreal does not work for a word. Just
no,
so
it's
entire
beyond that.
time. It was there very amazing though. It was so cool. It was so cool. But yeah, I've been lucky enough to go back 2 more times, and they
Yeah,
have a video department there that constantly they are recording video. They have a team that has these cameras that are wired into basically the mission control, and mission control will be walking the astronauts through training scenarios about
yep,
what they are about to go up into the International Space Station and do, like repairs. Let's say
yeah,
like
yeah,
one of the times that we were filming them basically replace these gigantic batteries that are the size of a small car,
mm,
stuff like that. But what they can be doing also is, and this is mind blowing to me, is they're walking through these scenarios and they're broadcasting that to the International Space Station to
right,
walk the astronauts that are up there through the process of, like, okay, we're going to walk through it here for you underwater in Houston, Texas at the Johnson Space Center. And then
yeah,
you just go ahead and put your suit on and hop out there and do that in space now. So that's wild.
wild.
But the other part of that scenario is they have a department that films things that are more for their promotional aspects.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean they got so much cool stuff going on there, including now they're working on the lunar program where they're about to set up a moon base basically. So
Yeah.
big portion of the neutral buoyancy lab, the NBL is blacked off to try to keep it dark when they need it to be, and
Yeah,
they've got
wow.
this like kinetic sand on the bottom that's supposed to mimic the sand on the moon if you were to
Yeah.
throw
What
it
it's
in that
like when
amount
you
of
see it.
gravity.
Yeah.
so it doesn't, just plume up and fill the
Of
whole
course.
water column. So wild. Yeah, a bunch of heroes over there. It's wild.
That is so that's the work that you got your Emmy for. That's that one. Is that correct?
A year in space. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the year in space. And like, tell me about that experience. I mean, what's that like? I don't think as a creator, to me, there's nothing more wonderful than the acknowledgement of your peers, and that's sort of a
Sure.
very high, where your peers go, yeah, good work, chief.
Yeah. I mean, I got to say, I played a very small role in that
Yeah,
very large project, but I'm so
of
proud to have
course.
done it, and also I just feel so blessed for the opportunity and the
Man,
experience.
I get that.
But yeah, I mean, amazing crew of documentary filmmakers that made the episodes and followed them out to Kazakhstan. Did all the real work of following him, Scott
Yeah.
Kelly, through the human emotions of what he was about to do and the real human stories of it. And then I got to do a little more of the fun stuff of shooting it underwater. But we made it real stylistic in a way that I haven't been able to do again, where it was a much darker environment. And we got to control lighting and
Well,
do
that's
some
it.
really fun stuff with that.
And that would have been one of the biggest things because, yeah, so much of what you do, you're working in, I guess, a live environment, whereas
Mm.
that would have actually been a controlled space where you could tinker with it and go, oh, hey, guys, could we just try this and
Sure, sure. And
make
typically
changes to
in
the
those
space?
scenarios, we're like when I've been back a couple times after, it's for the most part you're trying to stay out of the way. The last
Yeah.
thing you want to
Oh,
do is all of a
yeah.
sudden an
Get in the
astronaut
way of
runs
them.
into the dome port of your housing because you're
Yeah.
trying to get
Sorry,
this
Chief.
close shot or something. Yeah,
Ooh.
I know you're doing
Yeah.
something, but I'm trying to get a shot here.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Like
that
it's
one
fly on
was
the wall. Stay back.
yeah, that one was it was known that this is a big story about Scott, and so that there was a little more
Yeah.
leeway to get experimental. And yeah, just an incredible situation. I mean,
Yeah, that's
uh,
crazy.
there's
Because
there's there's 25 stories wrapped into the first hours of that shoot that I
I
won't even
could
get
only
into at the
imagine
moment.
because the
But
rigs were going up into space too. That was one of the things that was
mhm.
happening was like the epics were going up into space. And I remember seeing them, just in case it wasn't cool enough, like they're literally, you know, shooting them in space. And I'm like,
Yeah,
can you guys stop this? Like, that's just
yeah.
awesome. Because did you have
Uh,
to do some of the training with some of the guys that took them up or
those, is really interesting. No, no, to be short about that. But I mean, they had been trained, and also like
yeah,
the astronauts that go up there are already so technically minded, and a lot of them
absolutely.
are already photographers.
Yeah, nice.
But Terry and I know Terry's a big photographer, and Scott himself was like after the shoot we did in the tank, we went out and grabbed beers. It was Scott's last night in town, and he's got a million people to talk to, and he wanted to come over and talk to me about the red cameras. I'm like, this is so weird.
Dude.
This is
So,
so,
again, for real. Like
yeah,
you're
yeah,
like, me?
yeah.
But again, if you love cameras, it's the same as what I was saying on Ocean X. You just need people there to
Mm,
talk because you can talk
mm.
tech forever, is what I have found with my, whenever I travel with crews, like we go and
Yeah,
have a few beers and we just talk cameras for
yeah.
hours. So
And when
it's
you're
good to
around the
keep.
people that don't care about that stuff, that's when you really
Yeah.
realize it. Because like, oh my gosh, are you guys
Oh,
still
mate, you see
going?
the eyes roll back in the head and like, can you idiots shut up? I'm like,
Yes.
what? This is the best. We're, we're,
Yeah.
we're actually, we're terrible to go to the cinema with as well. If you're,
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
like,
Totally.
look at the richness of those blacks. And they're going, what is wrong with
Mm.
you?
Yep. Yep. It's really funny because my wife is one of her favorite sayings is I'll go like, oh my god, that looks like crap. She goes, oh, did they not crush the blacks enough? I'm like, oh, that's thanks, babe.
Stop
That's cute.
it.
She's got these little bits she's always heard me you know complain
Yeah,
about and stuff while we're watching
mate,
movies.
we are all the same. Now,
But
tell
I'm
me a
also a
little bit
writer,
about,
so unfortunately, I feel like most things I watch, I've seen 2 minutes of it, and I could tell you exactly how this whole thing can
yeah,
go, and that's the
see
worst. I know I need
that,
to shut up.
that makes it tough.
Yeah,
Now, with the work that you're doing now, so you're obviously, mate, you're pursuing the passion. You've gone all in to
indeed.
doing your own thing.
Yeah, indeed, man. And loving it. I've been really, really blessed to have some regular clients and some companies like Base Films who I've been working with a good bit. Going back to Neom at least once a year for the past 3 years, which has been incredible. But also doing some cinema work that Like to me, you know, my heart and my childhood energy, my childlike energies, I should say, and everything is still always going to be in nature. It's going to be in the
Yeah.
ocean, but I love doing cinema work. Like I
Yeah.
mean, it's that's also another part of me where I thought I would be a feature film director until I actually spent enough time on feature film sets and realized,
Yeah.
no, I don't want to do
To go, man, this sucks.
that. Yeah, and so to be a specialty operator, you know, to be able to come in
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
sometimes just day play, if not, you know, 2 3 days on, you know, a 4 or 5 month project and get some specialty shots for them. That's my favorite. I love
That's
it.
just the right
Yeah.
amount because you don't have to suffer through the whole process. You just get to rock into a bit and then leave and go, see you guys, have fun.
Totally. And I'm down for the longer term projects, of course, too. But there is something special about when it's a small, kind of concentrated, concise effort of,
Yeah.
we know we have to get this, and it is a specialty type of thing, you know, then the efforts that go into it and everything and the attention that go
Totally.
into it. And then again, the pressures involved with it
Oh,
too.
the
It's like,
massive,
okay, well, got to
but
get
that
this
gives
done
you the
now.
opportunity to do your best work, is to
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
that, you know, this is it. You need to give all your attention to this one thing. You don't have to divide it across, you know, a great many,
Yeah.
and, you know, just
100%.
put all your knowledge, all your skills into making that exceptional.
Absolutely.
Because if you've has any of that work really have you noticed a change in the way that you approach your work over these last couple of years now that it's, you know, you for you?
Um, I don't know if it's changed in just because it's me doing it from a freelance perspective versus,
Yeah,
you know, when I was at Red, a lot of times I was doing my freelance work during my vacation time.
of
So
course.
every vacation day was basically spent doing that type of thing. But my work has changed through my own progression, from my own experience, and what I've learned over time. 100%. You know,
Yeah,
it's always maturing. I want to say it's always progressing, and some of that also ends up happening way before you hit the water. You know, just my knowledge base is, I'm trying to constantly expand my knowledge base and training so that, you know, when somebody tells me, you know, there's this crazy scenario we want to shoot in this specific way, I could pre-plan on how to set it up for success versus try to guess and hopefully make it happen. Shooting the opening sequence to a movie, The Colony, which is
yeah,
on Netflix. That's the whole opening sequence is an underwater setup, and it was being shot on these Hawk anamorphics with a
yeah.
vintage 65, you know, full frame lenses, and there was only one set that existed in the entire world,
Oh
and they're being
wow.
used on this show. So there's no way I could test before I get out to Germany to shoot this or anything
Oh
like that. It was
god.
literally just trying to come in with what I could pre-plan, what
Yeah.
I have known, what questions I could ask to my peers and my mentors, and kind
Full
of
on.
come in and make it all work. And somehow it did. but it was, you know, there was,
Yeah.
you know, you're talking about just to physically make the thing fit.
Yeah.
There's not a millimeter left over of space in certain
Oh,
areas on the gears and things like that to make it all fit. But then just to make it fit is one thing. To make it optically perform properly, and
correct.
yeah, it's, so, you know, challenges like that are they're fun. So it's, you know,
Yeah.
it's that's the mental game of it all too, instead of just the physical
Peak
game.
stress. Well,
Oh
and
yeah.
that is it, isn't it? It's that mental
Mhm.
preparation where you, and I'm sure you're the same, you know, where I'll spend, you know, whatever the job is, I'll spend days, weeks, months, you know, thinking through the job, thinking through, you know, and
Absolutely.
like even this stuff that I do here, like the amount of work you put into testing a setup, you know, just to make sure it works. And you go to bed thinking about it, going, oh, what if I did that cable? And what if I
Yeah.
split this? And what if I tried that? Like you just can't help yourself, can you? Like
So
there's, you
you
know,
could be thinking about it for months, and those thoughts right there are definitely going to pop up the night before, especially the night before getting on an airplane or something like that.
oh, totally. Because
Yeah,
you're trying to make
absolutely.
sure. Because this is one of the funniest things, and it's something I've actually never understood about myself. I'm actually like super forgetful and, you know, a bit of a shambles. But when it comes to like packing my kit,
Mm,
like I can remember like down to the screw what
totally.
is required because I
Yeah.
do like a mental build in my head. and then I'll lay it all out and then pack it all away. And I've never understood how I can have like such a photographic memory
Yeah.
when it comes to camera gear. I have never understood that.
I'm exactly with you. Honestly, every trip I pack for, I kind of step back eventually, and I kind of blown away, like, whoa, how did that just happen? And it's
Yeah.
some of it is so automatic. I know I've
Yeah.
already thought it out months in advance, and I've already sometimes done it before and been through it, even though some of the elements might change. But then I get everything perfectly packed, perfectly fit. There's not a millimeter to spare in this case, and I weigh it, and it's literally, a
To the
gram or
gram.
two underneath
Yep.
the
That's
the
the
weight
one.
allowance. I'm like,
I got the scales.
whoa,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
It
amazing.
blows.
Yeah.
Like I find that I find that endlessly weird
Yeah.
having that super bizarre skill set that I don't have for anything else. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
it
I can't
doesn't
apply it to very
translate
much
to
else in my life
anything
too.
else
Yeah.
in my life
Yeah. Totally.
except when I pack, because and you'd be the same whenever you're doing international trips. Sometimes you have trouble with what you can take in and what you can fly and what you
True.
and I like it is so. I'm trying to actually think of an occasion where I've forgotten something, and like I don't think
I
it
know.
exists.
I second guess myself the whole way, but then I
Yeah,
once I'm there and I prep everything and set it
it's all
up
there.
and then I remind myself, I'm like, yeah, you made checklists and you've done this a million times, and you've
Yeah,
you've had sleepless nights staying up thinking about these things already, so that's why.
correct.
Whether we know it or not, we are constantly working on it and we're training ourselves. It's just,
We are.
I think, kind of, yeah, it
It's
is weird.
obsessive, and it comes back to that point where I go, this is a terrible life choice. But if you're all in, if you're fully committed, it actually ends up being like the greatest adventures of your whole life. And
Right.
and this is the nice
Very
part
true.
is, and I've got to thank you for this because, you've played a very big part in that for me. In
Ah.
particular, how you managed to wrangle me into some of the red parties at when I was over there for Cinegear, and not too similar to yourself. I'm like, hey Sean, hey Sean, hey Sean, hey Sean, can you get me in? And
Yeah,
because I
totally. I love
remember
it. I love it.
the relentlessness, mate, when I want something.
No,
Um,
there was never a doubt though. Hold on, I'm not going.
no,
He's not going. No,
there,
I'm not.
I,
Scott's getting in.
I'm getting in. I'm getting in because I remember watching like the year before I'd thought about going, and I remember watching a live stream. I think Jared was actually posting something, and he was letting off fireworks in the car
Oh
park.
yeah.
And
Oh, yeah.
I was sitting in my lounge room at home with my wife, and I'm like, man, I could have been there watching this loose cannon, shoot fireworks. And then 12 months later, I was standing there watching that loose cannon, shooting off fireworks at Red. And I'm like, man,
In
this is my
person.
dreams coming true.
Yes.
Like I'm literally
Yes.
living this dream.
Yeah, that ended up becoming a tradition. Yeah.
Man, it's a tradition. And then like the next year is, and you see, I was, oh my God. And it was ending up chatting. It was the fact that I'd be there with all these people that I knew from the internet that,
Right.
and I'd known from Red User and stuff that, like absolute just superstars of the game. And I'm there like having beers with them and talking shop with them. And you're just there going, this is just crazy.
Yeah, it's so cool professionally too from a networking standpoint, but not that any of us were thinking about that at the moment because we're
No,
just all coming together with like a similar spirit. And like you said too, we all kind of jumped in with Red and in digital cinema and in this industry in general with this kind
totally.
of this optimism of I'm gonna effing do it. It's just gonna happen no matter what.
It's just going to happen.
And so yeah, the vibes are all similar between everybody,
It's
and
all the
it's a
same because you
celebration
have
of the
to be.
vibe. Yeah, yeah.
Well, good, to make something of yourself, in this industry, there's no other way.
Mm,
Like if you are not obsessive and relentless, with absolute singular focus,
mm,
like you won't do it. And I've watched people try to get into it and you can see the half-heartedness from them.
mm, mm.
And they're the ones that, 12 months later are long gone. But
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
that, yeah,
yeah.
that Fincher mindset where you're looking at the footpath going, no, 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 no. That's the one.
Indeed.
Oh, now, look, my dude, I'm very conscious of your time. But
Okay.
if people want to follow you, follow your adventures, all the cool stuff you
Mhm.
do, if they want to, get you out on their next on their next big feature, how do we follow Mr. Sean Ruggeri around the internet?
Love it. Thanks for the plug. Yeah, telepathyproductions.com is my website. Got some samples of my work. I'm so long overdue to sit down and finish a reel I've got to do. But telepathyproductions.com and Snap a Map on Instagram.
Snap a map.
I don't
The
stay as
dude.
active as I need to be on there nowadays, but yeah.
You just got to post the cool stuff you do, but yeah, it takes so much time. Like when you got that dad life and the husband life and the self-employed life. I get you, man. That's it's hard work. What I'll do is I'll throw links to all those things. So if people want to find you and track you down and chat stupid things, then they can find you that way. But Sean, I'm so grateful, my man. When are we going to see you in Australia next? Have you anything on the cards?
I got to get back. I don't yet, but I've got to get back. I miss you all over there. I just miss that beautiful land of yours.
Mate,
and I've got sooner or later. What's that?
And there's some wrecks at Morton Island, like
less
than 60 minutes from. You've probably already dived them.
Nope, I've not.
Man, well, when you come over next time, I'm going to take you over there and we're going diving on the wrecks.
Love it. I love it. Yes. I appreciate your time too, Scott. Thanks so much for having me on, man.
Dude, I am so stoked, mate. I'll thank you, Sean. This has been the most wonderful conversation, and I appreciate you, my friend. Thank you.
And I will see you over there soon. I want some barbecue and beer and see your beautifully manicured lawn.
Barbecue, beers, and lawn, mate. You know it. Bit of putt-putt out the back. I cannot wait, my friend. All right. Thanks, brother.
Take care, Scott. Thank you.